My daughter looked me in the eye across my own kitchen table and said, "You're too old to matter. This house should be mine now. Why don't you just leave?" The kettle clicked off behind me like a small explosion, and I didn't move, not because I agreed, but because if I moved I was afraid the floor would tilt and spill me into a life where those words were ordinary. She sat there with her coffee, legs crossed neatly, a softness to her voice that didn't match the jagged edges of what she was saying. She'd chosen her moment, late afternoon, the sun laying polite rectangles on the linoleum, the old clock ticking like a witness who had promised not to interfere. "It's not personal," she added, as if evicting your mother could be categorized like recycling. "You're rattling around in here alone. It's inefficient." She'd been using that word lately, as if I were a factory and she my auditor. I asked her what she meant to do with me exactly, fold me into a storage unit? She rolled her eyes, the same teenage gesture she never quite outgrew. "There are places," she said. "Good ones. I'll handle everything. You just have to sign a few things so I can help." She slid a slim folder toward me, pale gray, harmless as a cloud. Inside were pages that used soft fonts and friendlier words: temporary authorization, household management consent, limited power of attorney. The lines for signatures were long and patient, the way a trap is patient. "It's 30 days, she said. "Just so I can clean up the bills and talk to the bank. Then we'll reassess." I looked at her hands, my hands, really, slimmer and younger, a tiny scar near the thumb from when she cut herself opening a can at 15 and called me sobbing because blood proves disaster. Those hands now nudged the pen toward me, coaxing. "This is for your own good," she said, and something inside me went very still. I thought of the nights I sat up with her fever, the mornings I braided her hair before school, the afternoons I pretended not to see her crying in the bathroom so she could decide who she wanted to be before I offered rescue. "For my good," I repeated, and let the words sit on my tongue until they tasted like metal. "Then why does it feel like disappearing?" She sighed, a sound I knew too well, the one that says the other person is being unreasonable. "You always make things dramatic." She stood, kissed the top of my head like a nurse, and said she'd be back tomorrow, "We'll do this properly," and left the folder on the table with the certainty of someone leaving a gift. When the door shut, the house settled around me with its familiar sounds, the refrigerator's weary hum, a bus breathing at the stop outside, a neighbor's dog declaring itself to the evening. I made tea with hands that had steadied worse tremors and read every word. I didn't sign. I put the papers away, not because they were safe in a drawer but because I could breathe without seeing them. Then I did the small ordinary things that keep a person from cracking, wiped the table, swept the crumbs, watered the plants that don't complain about the weather. I told myself she was frightened, that she had wrapped her fear in logic and called it a plan, that tomorrow we would talk like two adults who could still find the bridge between us. When I took the trash to the bin by the back steps, the bag split and a spill of junk mail and onion skins slid across the concrete. I knelt with a sigh, gathering the mess, and that was when I saw it, a torn corner from a cheap notepad, the kind she keeps in her bag, covered in my name written over and over. Not the real shape of it, but close, too close. The first attempts were clumsy, the last few were almost right, each letter learning from the one before, the M finding my slope, the Y catching the small curve I've had since school, the flourish at the end sharpening as if it had always belonged to her hand. Beneath the last line she had underlined one version twice, as if to crown the winner. I sat on the step with that scrap in my palm while the sky turned the color of lukewarm dishwater and the streetlight clicked on. It was such a small thing, nothing a court would accept, nothing you could take to a bank as proof, Just a piece of paper that still smelled like her purse and told the truth in a voice no one else would hear. She had practiced me. Practiced enough to believe she could become me wherever it was convenient, at the teller's window, on a dotted line, inside a database that would never ask about the shape of the woman who owned the name. I felt a heat rise in my chest, not anger exactly, not yet, but a clean burn that cauterizes a wound before it can poison you. I went back inside, opened the gray folder again, and noticed the little things I'd missed: a penciled star beside the notarization clause, a post-it with a time and address, tomorrow at 10, a tiny smear of foundation along the edge where she'd touched it too carelessly. She hadn't come to discuss. She'd come to execute. I took out my old leather notebook, the one I carry when the world starts to shift, and wrote the date, the hour, her exact words, the shape of the pen she'd brought, blue, cap-chewed, promotional logo for a gym she never went to, the practice signatures on the torn scrap, the way she said inefficient like a diagnosis. I wrote until the tremor left my fingers. Then I called the bank manager I've known for 20 years and left a message asking for an appointment, and I called Maria because Maria knows the difference between panic and action, and she never confuses the two. I put the folder in the place where important things live, not in the desk where I keep recipes and batteries, but in the high cabinet above the stove where I store the heavy pot we only use at holidays, a place you cannot reach on impulse. I washed the single cup she had used and set it upside down on the rack because dryness is something you can make even on nights like this. When the phone buzzed with a message from her, "Love you. Don't worry." I stared at the words until they lost their edges. Love and worry do not come tied to a pen. Tomorrow, she would arrive expecting my name to cooperate. Tonight, I practiced another sentence in my head, slow and steady until it fit the shape of my mouth. I am not signing myself out of my life. I didn't sleep that night, not because my body refused, but because my mind wouldn't allow it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that scrap of paper with my name copied again and again in her handwriting, the awkward M's smoothing themselves into my own, the long tail of the Y catching closer each time. That scrap wasn't practice. It was rehearsal for theft. I lay in the dark listening to the house breathe, the fridge clicking on, the clock sighing its seconds, and I thought about all the times I had defended her, even when I knew I shouldn't. The job she lost because the boss was unfair. The landlord who lied about rent. The boyfriend who trapped her into debts that never added up. I had believed her because she was my daughter, and a mother's belief is the most dangerous currency of all. By morning I felt hollow but steady, like a beam stripped of paint. I put on my coat and walked to the bank. The manager, a woman who'd known me for decades, looked at the gray folder as though it had teeth. She didn't say fraud, but her eyes did. She pulled up records on her screen, the glow reflecting off her glasses. "These entries," she said, pointing. "They don't match your history. They were submitted at 11:47 p.m. from an unfamiliar device. Remote notarization flagged. We'll file an internal hold, but you'll need to provide a sworn affidavit." I signed the paper she gave me, pressing my pen so firmly the tip nearly tore the page. It felt good to write my name honestly, to see its lines still belong to me. When I left the bank, the sky was a flat winter gray, the kind that makes time feel stalled. She was waiting for me outside the bus stop, her coat open, her smile forced. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No hello, no apology. I told you I'd handle it." "Handle it by becoming me?" I asked, and held her gaze until she looked away. Her excuses spilled quickly. "I just needed a bridge. I just needed time. You don't understand how hard it is out there." Her words were coins I'd heard too many times, shiny on the surface, worthless in value. That evening I called Maria, and she came with bread and her sharp eyes. I showed her the gray folder, the forged attempts, the bank's affidavit. She listened without interrupting, then said, "She isn't guessing anymore. She's hunting." We sat at the table like generals over maps, outlining what had to be done, keep records of everything, copy every letter, log every call. Maria insisted I make duplicates and store them at her house. "If she's willing to use your name," she said, "don't assume she won't use your keys." The thought chilled me more than the winter air ever could. Later, as I prepared for bed, I passed Elena's old room, now used as storage, boxes stacked high. I opened one and found her childhood things, a tattered violin case, a photograph of her at 7 with flour on her cheeks, grinning while holding a tray of crooked biscuits. For a moment my chest ached with a grief worse than anger. How could that child become this woman sitting in parking lots, waiting for her mother to sign away her life? I closed the box, whispered her name softly as if it might summon her back, but silence answered. That night, I wrote in my leather notebook again. Date, time, weather, her exact words at the bus stop. I wrote them down because I knew the day would come when she'd deny them. And when that day came, I wanted the record to exist in ink, not memory. As I laid the pen aside, I practiced a sentence aloud to the empty room. "You cannot be me, even if you steal my name." Saying it made my throat burn, but it also steadied me. Because tomorrow, I knew, she would return with new papers, new tricks, and I would need every ounce of that steadiness to hold the line. She came back the next afternoon, right on schedule, as if betrayal had become part of her calendar. No flowers this time, no polite small talk, just the scrape of the chair as she sat down across from me. She carried another folder, thicker than before, with a bright sticky note on the front that read urgent in her handwriting. She slid it toward me as though she were serving dinner. "I talked to a friend," she began, her tone brisk, rehearsed. "This is simpler than what I showed you yesterday. 30-day authorization, very standard. You sign, I take care of the loan, no penalties, no more stress. By the end of the month, it's like it never happened." She smiled, the kind of smile people practice in mirrors before job interviews. I didn't touch the folder. "You forged my name," I said, voice quiet. "Why should I believe a single word now?" Her face flickered, just for a second, before she slipped the mask back on. "Mama, please. I made a mistake." I panicked. "But I can fix it, we can fix it. Don't you trust me at all?" Trust. That word, once so easy, now felt like a shard in my mouth. I thought of the scrap of paper with my name written over and over, of the bank's records glowing on the screen, of the way she stood waiting for me at the bus stop like a predator tracking prey. "You didn't panic," I said. "You practiced." Her smile collapsed. "God, you're impossible," she snapped. "You'd rather drag us both through court than just sign a piece of paper? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? People are already talking." "People are talking because you told them stories," I replied. "Stories about me forgetting, about me losing control. Lies." She pushed the folder closer, the papers inside rustling like restless birds. "Do you want me ruined? Is that what you want? Because that's where this goes if you don't let me help. I'll be bankrupt, homeless, finished. And everyone will know you could have stopped it." Her words landed heavy, but they did not crush me. Once, I would have rushed to shield her from consequences, thrown myself between her and the fire. But now I saw the fire was hers, not mine. I leaned forward, my palms flat on the table. I did not raise you to steal from me. I did not raise you to use tears and threats like weapons. If you burn, it will be from the matches you lit yourself. Her eyes narrowed, the sweetness gone. You'll regret this, she hissed. You think you're strong, but you're not. You're old, you're tired, and when you slip, because you will, I'll be the one left standing. And no judge will believe you over me. The words chilled me more than winter air, because I saw the truth inside them. She wasn't bluffing. She was planning. When she finally left, the folder still on the table, I sat very still, letting the silence gather around me. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, I opened my leather notebook and wrote every detail, her words, her tone, the time on the clock, the way her hand shook when she pushed the papers forward. Because she was right about one thing. There would come a day when it was her word against mine. And when that day arrived, I intended to have more than memory on my side. It didn't take long before I felt the whispers following me like shadows. At the bakery, two women stopped mid-conversation when I stepped inside, their smiles stiff, their eyes too curious. At church, Father prayed for those whose minds are clouded by age, and though he didn't name me, I felt the congregation's glances brush across my shoulders like cold wind. Rumors spread faster than truth, and I knew exactly whose tongue carried them. Elena had always known how to play people. As a child, she could turn a teacher's scolding into sympathy with a single tear. As a teenager, she could charm her way out of trouble with a smile and a story. Now, as a grown woman, she wielded those same tools like weapons sharpened by necessity. Mama's confused these days. I overheard her telling Mrs. Harris outside the post office. She forgets things, repeats herself. I just worry she's not safe alone. She said it softly, almost lovingly, the way someone would describe a fragile bird. Mrs. Harris clucked in sympathy, and I felt the sting like a slap. At the grocer, I reached for change, and the clerk, a boy no older than 20, offered, "Do you need help counting that?" I looked him square in the eye, my coins steady in my hand, but the doubt was already there. Doubt planted by my own daughter. Maria came to me furious. "She's poisoning the well," she said. "Turning your own neighbors against you." I told her I expected nothing less. But inside I burned, not just from anger but from shame. To be doubted by strangers is one thing, to be doubted by people who once knew you strong is another wound entirely. One Sunday after Mass, Elena staged her performance outright. She approached me on the church steps, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Mama," she said, placing a hand on my arm, "you left the stove on again last night. I'm so worried you'll hurt yourself." Gasps rippled through the group. My cheeks flamed. I had not left the stove on. I had checked it 3 times, as I always did. I pulled my arm back and spoke with all the steadiness I could muster. "Do not mistake betrayal for care," I said, my voice clear enough for every ear to catch. The crowd went silent, some faces shocked, others doubtful, some even pitying. Elena's expression faltered for just a moment before she turned away, murmuring something about me being tired. "Back home, Maria said I had struck a blow. They saw the steel in you," she insisted. But victory felt thin. Whispers don't vanish with a single sentence. They cling. That night, I opened my leather notebook and created a new section, Community. I wrote the date, the place, the words I'd heard from her lips and from the mouths she had bent to her story. Gossip as evidence, ridiculous on its face, but my lawyer had told me perception mattered. If Elena was building her case in public, then I would too. I closed the notebook and whispered to the silence, "She may have their ears." But I have the truth, and I will not let her write me out of it. The envelope arrived on a Monday morning, heavy paper with the courthouse seal pressed into the corner. I knew before I opened it that it wasn't another bank notice, wasn't another polite letter from a lawyer padding their billable hours. This one had the cold gravity of law. Inside, petition for guardianship. My name at the top, Elena's name just below it, and line after line of words that stripped me bare: diminished capacity, unsafe to manage assets, requires responsible oversight. My own daughter had put in writing what she'd been whispering for weeks, that I was no longer fit to live my own life. The words blurred as I read them. Guardianship. A term meant to protect the frail, now twisted into a weapon against me. It wasn't about my safety. It was about control. She wanted my house, my name, my choices signed away to her. It wasn't enough to forge papers in the dark. Now she wanted the state to do the stealing for her. I called my lawyer with hands that shook, though my voice held steady. She wasn't surprised. I told you escalation would come, she said. We'll contest it. We'll gather affidavits, medical evaluations, proof of competence. But you must be ready. This is no longer just family business, it's a court battle. When Maria came that afternoon, I showed her the petition. She read it twice, her jaw tightening with every line. She's cutting off every door, she said, her voice low. She wants to trap you where only she holds the key. That night I couldn't eat. I walked through each room of the house, touching the objects that made up my life. The spoon worn smooth by years of stirring soup, the photo of my husband in his work shirt, the ledger where I'd written every expense in pencil. Each one was evidence of my existence, proof of the steady, ordinary competence Elena now called decline. The next days blurred into a flurry of preparation. I gathered bills, receipts, calendars filled with church events and doctor's visits, all logged neatly. My lawyer said they mattered, that judges were human, and humans needed to see order. At the clinic, my doctor signed an affidavit without hesitation. You're sharper than most of my patients half your age, she said, though her smile held sorrow. Meanwhile, Elena moved faster. She spoke in hushed tones outside church, told neighbors she feared I'd burn the house down, that I wandered at night, that I'd forgotten how to cook. Lies dressed as worry, seeds planted in every ear. And people, God help them, believed her. Fear spreads easier than truth. At night I sat in my kitchen with the petition spread on the table, the words staring back at me like an accusation. I copied them into my notebook line by line, so I could face them on my own terms. Then I wrote my answer: I am not gone. I am not confused. I am betrayed. When the court date came, circled in red by some clerk's indifferent hand, I traced the mark with my finger and whispered to the empty house, let them try. I will not vanish. The courthouse had the stale scent of dust and polish, that mixture of age and authority that clings to every hallway where people go to prove who they are. I had been there before, jury duty, paying a fine, signing papers when my husband died, but never like this. Never with my own name on trial. Maria walked beside me, her hand linked through my arm, though I told her I could walk just fine. She knew it wasn't my body she was steadying, it was my heart. The courtroom was fuller than I expected. Neighbors sat in the benches, some pretending they were there for other business, others staring openly with curiosity. Elena was already seated at the front, her lawyer beside her. She wore pale gray, a color she'd chosen carefully, soft, serious, unthreatening. Her hair was brushed sleek, her expression carved into sorrow. She looked every inch the dutiful daughter, reluctantly dragging her fragile mother before a judge. If I hadn't known her heart, I might have pitied her. The judge entered, gavel striking wood, and the room stilled into silence. My lawyer leaned close, whispering, "Remember, short, clear answers. You don't need to sound clever. You just need to sound yourself." Elena's lawyer spoke first. His voice was smooth, each sentence delivered like a sermon. He painted a picture of a mother slipping away, confused about bills, repeating stories, leaving the stove on. He cited the wellness check, twisting it into a tale of decline. He even held up the forged mortgage papers, presenting them as evidence of mismanagement. My blood boiled, but my lawyer pressed her hand against mine. "Patience," she murmured. Then Elena herself took the stand. She walked slowly, as if weighed down by the burden of her care. Her voice trembled just enough to seem fragile but not enough to seem false. "I only want to protect her," she said, eyes glistening. "I've watched her forget things. I've seen her confuse dates. She's vulnerable, and I can't stand by while she risks everything she's built." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, and a murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. Some neighbors nodded, convinced by the performance. When my turn came, the walk to the witness stand felt longer than any road I had walked in years. The clerk swore me in, and I sat, folding my hands to hide their trembling. My lawyer began gently. "Do you pay your own bills?" "Yes," I said, and produced the receipts, each one dated, each one neat. "Do you recall your medical appointments?" "Yes," I answered, listing the dates from memory. "Do you remember when you received the petition for guardianship?" "January 14th, I said without hesitation, 9:12 a.m. The postmark was from 2 days earlier. My lawyer smiled slightly, knowing precision was my best defense. Then she asked the question we had rehearsed, the one I feared most. "Why do you believe this petition was filed?" The courtroom stilled. I drew in a breath, let the silence hold me, and spoke. "Because my daughter is not protecting me. She is protecting herself. She forged my name on a loan. She spread lies among our neighbors. She wants my house, my name, my choices signed away to her. This is not love. This is theft wrapped in the language of care." My voice cracked on the word daughter, but the crack was truth, and it echoed louder than any performance. For the first time, Elena looked directly at me. Her eyes were sharp, the mask slipping for an instant. I saw not sorrow, not love, but desperation. Then she looked away, whispering to her lawyer. Cross-examination came next, her lawyer circling me with words. "Isn't it true you once misplaced a bill?" "I corrected it before it was due," I answered. "Isn't it true you sometimes forget names?" "I forget, then remember, like every other person." "Isn't it true you rely heavily on your friend Maria?" I straightened. Relying on friends is not incapacity. It's community. A few people in the benches nodded at that. After hours that felt like days, the judge finally ended the session. No ruling yet. He said more testimony would be required, more evidence reviewed. The gavel struck, and it was over, for now. As the crowd began to file out, I felt Maria squeeze my hand. "You stood like iron," she whispered. My knees trembled beneath my skirt, but I kept my head high. Elena passed me on her way out, her perfume sharp in the air. She didn't speak, but her look said enough. This was not finished. Outside, the air was cold, the sky a dull silver. People murmured as they left, some glancing at me with pity, others with quiet respect. I walked down the courthouse steps with Maria at my side, each step deliberate, each breath steady. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: my daughter had underestimated me. I was not fading. I was fighting. That night at home, I placed the day's papers in the growing folder marked evidence, thicker now than any photo album I had ever kept. I set it beside my husband's picture and whispered, "They want to bury me alive. But I am still breathing." And as I turned off the light, I practiced a new sentence aloud, the one I would need for the battles yet to come: I am not the woman they say I am. I am the woman who remembers, who resists, who remains. The days after the hearing felt like walking through water, every step heavy, every sound muffled. But whispers have a way of breaking through even the thickest silence. By midweek, the village was humming louder than the church bells. At the market, I heard my name in half sentences: "Poor thing, she doesn't realize," and "The daughter is only trying to save her." The pitying glances stung worse than outright accusation. People weren't just doubting me, they were pitying me, and pity is the cruelest dismissal of all. Elena knew exactly what she was doing. I learned from Maria that she had gone to see Mrs. Harris and Mrs. Klein, women who run the gossip circuit like generals. She told them stories about me leaving the stove on, about wandering outside at night, about misplacing my wallet and accusing her of stealing it. Lies, all of them, but sweetly packaged in her hushed voice of concern. "I'm only trying to keep her safe," she told them. I'd never forgive myself if something happened. And of course, they nodded, because worry sounds noble even when it's poisoned. I tried to fight back in the small ways I could. At the grocer, I counted my change aloud with sharp precision, making sure the boy behind the counter and the two women behind me heard every coin. At church I stood tall, read the bulletin aloud to Maria without faltering, discussed scripture with Father Thomas, quoting verses from memory. Still, I could feel the doubt thick in the air. It clung to me like smoke after a fire. One afternoon I walked to the post office and felt the hush fall as I entered. A group of women stopped mid-conversation, their eyes darting. Finally one of them, bolder than the rest, asked, "Do you need help with your letters?" I looked at her straight, my voice steady. "I've been writing letters since before you were born," I said. The color rose in her cheeks, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had sprouted, watered by Elena's careful lies. That evening Maria found me at the table, my leather notebook open, my pen moving fast. "You're wearing yourself thin," she said, setting down the bread she'd brought. "You're not just fighting her. You're fighting a village that would rather believe a dramatic story than a quiet truth." I didn't stop writing. I was recording every interaction, the glances, the whispers, the questions. It felt ridiculous, but my lawyer had warned me. "Perception matters," she said. "Judges are human. If half a town believes you're slipping, that belief will seep into the courtroom." Elena wasn't finished either. The second court notice arrived within a week, another hearing scheduled, this time with witnesses she intended to bring. I read her list of names and felt the air leave my lungs. Mrs. Harris, the bank clerk, even Father Thomas. She was building her chorus, and I was expected to face them one by one. That night I allowed myself to break. I sat by the window in the dark, the house quiet, the weight pressing too heavy. I remembered Elena as a little girl with flour on her cheeks, laughing as she carried a tray of crooked biscuits. I remembered her teenage tantrums, the slammed doors, the tears I soothed with promises of tomorrow. And I asked myself the question that had been clawing at me for weeks: when did my daughter stop being my child and start being my enemy? Maria found me there, eyes wet, and she didn't scold. She just sat, her hand covering mine. You're tired, she said. But tired doesn't mean beaten. I nodded, though my chest felt hollow. Because the truth was, I was tired, tired of proving, tired of defending, tired of loving someone who used that love as a blade. Still, when I closed my notebook that night, I whispered the same words I'd written at the bottom of every page. I remain. I remember. I resist. And though my body trembled, my resolve sharpened like steel. Because soon, the courtroom would call again. The second hearing was worse than the first. The benches were fuller, the air heavier, as if every curious neighbor had decided this was the play of the season and they would not miss the next act. I walked in with Maria at my side, my notebook tucked against my chest like a shield. Elena was already there, her lawyer whispering in her ear, her face arranged in that same sorrowful expression, eyes wide, mouth soft, as though she were enduring a burden instead of carrying out a betrayal. The judge entered, the gavel fell, and the show began. Elena's lawyer called the first witness, Mrs. Harris. She shuffled nervously to the stand, clutching her purse, glancing at Elena for reassurance. I saw her at the market, she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. She seemed confused about the prices. She asked the same question twice. I thought, maybe she wasn't herself. A murmur rippled through the benches. I gripped my notebook tighter. Forgetting a price at the market, that was the cornerstone of their case. Still, the poison was planted. Next came the bank clerk, a young man who could barely keep his tie straight. He testified that my account had flagged irregular activity. He did not say it was fraud. He did not say my name had been forged. But Elena's lawyer leaned on his words, twisting them into insinuation. Irregular, he repeated, as if the syllables themselves were proof. Then came Father Thomas. His presence cut deeper than the rest. He sat tall, his hands folded, his eyes heavy with something between pity and duty. She has repeated herself in confession, he said softly. Told me the same story more than once, as if it were new. He glanced at me briefly, and I wanted to shout, Father, isn't that what confession is? To repeat what weighs on you until it loses its power? But I stayed silent. Elena's lawyer let the testimony hang, then called his client to the stand. My daughter rose, walking slowly, shoulders curved just enough to look burdened. Her voice was the same soft tremor I had heard before. I love my mother, she said. But she's not the same. She forgets things. She leaves the stove on. She calls me at night, confused, not remembering why. I can't let her go on like this. Someone has to protect her, even if she hates me for it. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, and a wave of sympathy moved through the room like a tide. Then it was my turn. I rose, spine straight, my notebook firm in my hand. I took the stand, was sworn in, and answered each question with precision. Dates, bills, appointments, all clear, all exact. My lawyer handed me receipts, and I identified each one. Yes, I paid this on the 15th. Yes, this is my handwriting. Yes, I recorded it in my ledger. I did not falter. I did not wander. Finally, my lawyer asked, Why do you think your daughter has brought this petition? The courtroom hushed. I looked directly at the judge and spoke, steady as stone. Because she forged my name on a loan. Because she spread lies among my neighbors. Because she is drowning in her own debts and wants to drag me under with her. This is not protection. This is theft, dressed in softer words. The silence after was thick. Elena's eyes met mine, and for the first time the mask cracked. Anger flickered there, raw and sharp, before she looked away. Cross-examination came, her lawyer circling me like a wolf. "Isn't it true you sometimes forget names?" "Yes," I said, "and I remember them a minute later." "That is not incapacity. That is being human." "Isn't it true you rely on your friend Maria daily?" "Yes," I answered. "Friendship is not proof of weakness. It is proof of community." Some heads nodded at that. By the end of the day, the judge adjourned without ruling. "We will hear more evidence," he said, gavel striking once more. No victory yet, but not defeat either. As I walked out, people stared, some with pity, some with thoughtfulness, a few with quiet respect. Maria squeezed my hand. "You cracked her mask," she whispered. I nodded, though inside I felt both weary and sharpened. That night, I sat at my table, my notebook open. I wrote every detail, the questions, the lies, the pitying looks. I underlined one sentence 3 times: "They want me silent. I will answer with truth." And when I closed the notebook, I whispered to the dark, "This is not over. I am not gone. And I will not be erased." The second hearing left me shaken, but it also left Elena emboldened. Within days new envelopes began to arrive, each one thicker, each one stamped with the seal of some office I had never had cause to fear before. Notice of inquiry. Request for documentation. Preliminary review. Social services, financial oversight, even the county health department, all with polite, clinical letters suggesting someone had raised concerns about my ability to live independently. I didn't need to guess who had made those calls. One afternoon 2 women appeared at my door with clipboards, their smiles stretched thin by the weight of their work. "We just want to make sure you're safe," one of them said, her eyes already scanning the kitchen as if expecting chaos. I brewed tea because I always do when people come into my house, but this time the ritual felt like a test. They asked if I remembered the date, if I knew the name of the president, if I could recite my address. I answered each question crisply, then opened my notebook and showed them the entries I had written every day for weeks, dates, times, interactions logged with the precision of an accountant. "I keep records," I said. "I always have." Their faces softened, but not enough to erase the shame of having to prove my own mind in my own kitchen. When they left, Maria came through the back door, her voice sharp with anger. "She's not just fighting you in court," she said. "She's trying to bury you in paperwork, drown you in inspections. She wants to wear you down until you give in." Maria suggested I stay with her a few days, but I shook my head. "If I leave my house, even for a week, the story becomes hers," I said. "They'll say I couldn't manage alone. I have to stay." That night I sat in the living room surrounded by papers, receipts, affidavits, letters, the growing stack of evidence that felt less like protection and more like armor I had to drag everywhere. My husband's photograph watched from the mantel, his smile steady, his work shirt rumpled. I whispered to him, "She's turning my life into a case file." A few days later, Elena confronted me directly. She appeared in the yard as I was clipping dead branches from the hydrangea, her coat too fine for the weather, her expression taut. "Why are you making this worse?" she demanded. "Do you want strangers crawling through your house? Because that's what's going to happen if you keep resisting me." "They've already been here," I said evenly. "And they left with nothing." She scoffed. "For now. But everyone sees it, Mama. The neighbors, the church, the court. You're slipping. They believe me." Her words landed like blows, Not because I believed them, but because part of me feared she was right. Doubt spreads faster than truth. I steadied my voice. Belief is not proof. And proof is what the court will require. Her eyes narrowed. You're destroying both of us. But when they finally take it from you, don't expect me to pick up the pieces. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving the air colder behind her. That evening I met with my lawyer again. She examined the new letters, shaking her head. This is pressure, nothing more. They're trying to exhaust you. Don't let them. We'll respond formally, but don't let her convince you that gossip is evidence. We're building a stronger case each time she overreaches. Still, I felt the fatigue settling deeper. Every knock at the door jolted me, every envelope made my chest tighten. I found myself double-checking locks, leaving notes to remind myself of tasks I never used to forget. Not because I was failing, but because I knew eyes were watching, waiting for a slip. That night, as I sat at the table, Maria reached across and took my hand. You can't fight this on fear alone, she said. You need something stronger. I have truth, I said. And you have me, she answered. I looked at the stack of papers, the weight of them pulling the table down, and for the first time in weeks I allowed myself to believe that maybe truth and loyalty together could be enough. But deep inside, I knew Elena wasn't finished. She had already played gossip, forged papers, and official inquiries. The next move would be harder, sharper. And I had to be ready to meet it with steel. The third hearing felt less like a proceeding and more like a battlefield. By the time I entered the courtroom, the benches were already crowded with neighbors, acquaintances, even strangers who had heard whispers and wanted to see how the story ended. My lawyer leaned toward me as we Saturday. This will be the hardest day, she said. She'll throw everything she has left. Be ready. Elena sat across from me, her posture perfect, her blouse immaculate, her eyes downcast in the posture of a weary but devoted daughter. I almost laughed at the performance, but the knot in my stomach was too tight. This was her last chance to paint me as incompetent, and I knew she would empty her arsenal. The judge called for order, and her lawyer began. He spoke with urgency now, no longer calm but pressing, as if rushing to nail boards over a sinking ship. He introduced documents, letters allegedly written by me but riddled with errors. One, he claimed, was proof I had missed paying insurance. Another, a note showing confusion about a bank withdrawal. My lawyer objected, demanding handwriting analysis, and the judge agreed. But I saw how the words lingered in the air, planting suspicion like weeds. Then came her parade of witnesses. Mrs. Harris again, repeating her story of the market, but more dramatic this time. The bank clerk, fumbling with his testimony, clearly coached but nervous. And then, worst of all, a neighbor I had thought of as a friend. She spoke of lights left on, of odd behavior, of how I sometimes seemed withdrawn. Each exaggeration landed like a bruise. I felt the weight of every eye in the room pressing against me. Finally, Elena rose. She walked to the stand, tissue in hand, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. I love my mother, she said, glancing briefly at me before looking down. But she isn't safe. She repeats herself, she forgets things, she's vulnerable. I can't stand by and watch her lose everything. If I must be hated for protecting her, then so be it. A tear slid down her cheek, perfect as a pearl. A murmur of sympathy rose from the benches. I sat there, my hands clenched, my heart hammering. Maria whispered in my ear, "Now. You stand now." When it was my turn, The walk to the stand felt endless, each step echoing. I placed my notebook on the table in front of me. Sworn in, I began. I answered questions with precision, dates of bills paid, amounts, names of doctors and appointments. My lawyer handed me receipts, and I identified each one with steady voice. Yes, this is mine. Yes, I paid this on the 15th. Yes, I wrote this in my ledger. Then came the judge's question, why do you believe your daughter has filed this petition? The courtroom stilled. I lifted my head, met his eyes, and spoke. Because she forged my name on a loan. Because she spread lies to neighbors, to the church, to this very court. Because she is drowning in her own debts and wants to steal my house, my life, my dignity to save herself. This is not care. This is theft. And it cuts deeper because it comes from my own child. My voice cracked on the word child, but I did not let it break me. I opened my notebook, flipping to the pages where I had recorded every encounter. Here are her words, her threats, her attempts. I wrote them down the moment they left her lips. Because memory can be doubted. Ink cannot. The room went silent. Elena shifted in her seat, her mask faltering. For the first time I saw fear flicker in her eyes. The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. We will recess for review, he said. The gavel struck, and the room erupted in murmurs. As I walked back to my seat, Maria squeezed my arm. You gave them the truth, she whispered. I nodded, my body trembling, but inside I felt something steadier than I had in months, not just defense, but strength. Because I knew then that even if the court doubted me, even if the neighbors whispered, the truth had already broken through her performance. And once truth cracks a mask, it can never be repaired. That night at home, I wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. Tomorrow, they will decide. But today, I stood. The courthouse the next morning was so crowded it felt like the entire town had come to watch the end of my story. The benches groaned under the weight of neighbors, acquaintances, even strangers who had only heard the gossip. I kept my eyes forward as I walked in, Maria at my side, my notebook clutched tight. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Elena was already seated, her lawyer's briefcase bristling with papers. She looked calm, almost serene, as if she had already been told the ending. Her blouse was immaculate, her hair pulled back, her face carefully arranged in sorrow. The perfect image of a devoted daughter, weary from caring for an ungrateful mother. But I had seen the cracks. I knew what lived beneath. The judge entered. The gavel fell. Silence draped the room. He spoke first of the evidence, the bills, the receipts, the affidavits from my doctor, the written statements from Maria and the bank manager. He spoke of handwriting experts, of irregularities in the forged loan documents. He spoke of neighbors' testimonies, some contradicting, some clearly exaggerated. His voice was measured, impartial, but every word pulled the rope tighter between us. Then he turned to me. Do you wish to make any final statement? I rose slowly, the notebook in my hand. My knees trembled, but my voice did not. I have lived 60 years in this house, I said. I have paid every bill, tended every garden, cooked every meal. My mind is not gone. My hands are not idle. What is gone is trust, because my daughter chose lies over love. She forged my name, she spread rumors, she dragged me into this court to erase me before I am finished. I will not be erased. Not by her. Not by anyone. A hush fell, heavy and absolute. I sat. The judge turned to Elena. Do you wish to make a final statement? She stood, clutching a tissue. Her voice trembled, practiced. I only wanted to protect her. I love her. But she doesn't see it. She refuses my help, and one day she will hurt herself, and then everyone will ask why I didn't act. I couldn't stand by and watch that happen. Her words hung in the air, soft and poisonous. Some faces in the crowd softened toward her. Others frowned. I saw Maria's jaw tighten, her hands balled into fists. The judge leaned forward. This court will deliver its decision tomorrow morning. Until then, all petitions are held in suspension. The gavel fell with a sharp crack. The room erupted into murmurs. Elena turned, her eyes locking on mine for just a heartbeat. And in that glance I saw it, not sorrow, not fear, but calculation. She wasn't finished, no matter what the court said tomorrow. Maria slipped her arm through mine as we left. You spoke like steel, she whispered. I nodded, though my chest ached with the weight of it all. Outside, the winter air cut cold, sharper than the whispers that followed me down the courthouse steps. That night I sat at my table, the house quiet around me. I opened my notebook and wrote one line, underlined twice, tomorrow they decide. But tonight, I remain. The final morning arrived cold and brittle, the kind of winter day where even the sun seems reluctant to rise. I dressed carefully, buttoning my coat as though armor, sliding my notebook into my bag one last time. Maria met me at the door, her hand firm on my arm. Today we finish this, she said, and I nodded, though in my chest I carried both dread and relief. The courthouse was fuller than ever, every bench taken, the air heavy with anticipation. Some faces looked at me with pity, others with doubt, a few with quiet respect. Elena sat across the aisle, her blouse pale, her eyes wide with carefully crafted sorrow. She looked fragile, almost saintly, and I wondered how many in that room believed the mask. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and silence fell. His voice was steady, deliberate, each word weighed. He reviewed the evidence, the receipts, the affidavits, the testimony of my doctor affirming my clarity, the handwriting expert confirming the forgery on the loan. He acknowledged the neighbors' stories but noted their inconsistencies, the exaggerations, the gossip. He spoke of Elena's claims, her stated concern, but also her financial debts and conflicts of interest. Then he leaned forward, his eyes sweeping the room. The petition for guardianship is denied, he said. The court finds no evidence of incapacity. This woman is fully competent to manage her own affairs. Furthermore, the evidence of forgery will be referred for further investigation. The gavel fell, final and sharp. For a heartbeat there was only silence. Then the room stirred, whispers swelling like a tide. Maria gripped my hand so tightly it hurt, tears bright in her eyes. I sat very still, the words sinking into me like sunlight after a storm. Denied. Competent. Still mine. Across the aisle, Elena's face blanched. She looked at me at last, and the mask cracked completely. I saw the fury there, the desperation, the naked truth of someone who had gambled everything and lost. She gathered her papers with trembling hands and walked out without a word. The crowd parted around her, whispers following like smoke. I walked out slowly, each step deliberate. On the courthouse steps, people watched me. Some nodded in respect, some looked ashamed for ever doubting, some turned away. I didn't need their approval. I had stood, and I had survived. Back home, I set my notebook on the table beside my husband's photo. I touched the frame gently. It's safe, I whispered. The house, the name, the life we built, it's still ours. For the first time in months, I breathed without the weight of fear pressing on my chest. That night, I lit a candle and sat in the quiet. I thought of Elena as a child, flour on her cheeks, laughing with crooked biscuits in her hands. I thought of her now, walking away from me with anger burning in her eyes. I grieved for what I had lost, but I also recognized what I had gained, the knowledge that even when love fails, dignity can remain. As the candle burned low, I whispered into the dark, I am not erased. I remain. And no one, not even my own child, can take that from me.